So here we are. The drama increases as closing arguments are set in this murder trial for tomorrow.
Yeah, by 9:30, the defense has rested. We want to bring in our WBZ legal analyst, Jennifer Roman, who's been such a great help to us analyzing this case from the very beginning. Jennifer, first of all, give us your initial reaction to how quickly this went this morning.
This was the third big surprise we've seen in this case. It was just stunning, almost, what the defense did today. First big surprise coming in when Brian Walshe pled guilty to the improperly disposing of a body charge. Second big surprise, sudden unexpected death syndrome. And now this, no witnesses from the defense.
Yeah, the judge did say that the defense has no burden of proof in the case. It's all on the prosecution. This is kind of akin to the defense kicking their feet up and say, prove your case.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The defense does not have any obligation to present witnesses. They can put their entire case in through cross-examination of the Commonwealth's witnesses. And the defense here is saying we are so confident that we poked enough holes into the Commonwealth's theory of the case that no jury is going to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And it's interesting, Jennifer, you had pointed out to us that the key for the jury is going to be deciding if Brian Walshe should be found guilty of premeditated murder, but that the prosecution struggled to establish premeditated murder here a little bit. Explain what you mean by that.
Sure. So the prosecution here, so for first-degree murder, you need to have this intention to kill, and it needs to be sort of planned in advance. That's the distinction between your first-degree and your second-degree murder charge. And here, the evidence that we have that would suggest a premeditation was that Brian Walshe asked his probation officer on December 22nd to be able to leave his home on January 1 to run errands. Because remember, Brian Walshe was under house arrest for his pending felony convictions. So that was sort of a pretty strong indication of premeditation, but also there's a lot of reasons why he may have wanted January 1 off to run errands. So I think that piece of evidence could go either way for the Commonwealth. But then other than that, we never got a clear view that Brian Walshe suspected or knew that Anna Walshe was having an affair. There was contradictory testimony about Anna Walshe and Brian Walshe's financial circumstances. Part of the Commonwealth theory was that he killed her to get the insurance money that was on her life and would have been paid out upon death. We kind of heard conflicting evidence about whether or not they were really in a dire financial situation. And so I think it became, and all the implements, all the weapons that he allegedly used to kill her were purchased after the Commonwealth thinks she died.
Yeah.
So I think they really struggled on that premeditation piece.
So if the jury doesn't believe the premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt, does the entire prosecution fall apart, or can they salvage the case with, the jury finding him guilty of, let's just say, murder 2, even though he hasn't been charged with it?
Yes, the jury could come back with a guilty finding on a lower charge than first-degree murder. Could be second-degree, it could be involuntary manslaughter. So they could come back. He could still be convicted even if they don't find premeditation.
And let's remind viewers, Jennifer, going all the way back to that surprise number 1, him pleading guilty to the lesser charges of disposing of a body, and that you were saying at the time, I recall that day, that's really all about carving out the possibility of parole for him. Explain to people what the rules are here in terms of what he was charged with, what he decided to plead guilty to, and how that affects potential sentencing.
Absolutely. A defendant cannot plead guilty to a first-degree murder charge. That's because there's a mandatory sentence in Massachusetts, if you're convicted of first-degree murder, of life without the opportunity for parole. So it's a true life sentence. On a second-degree murder charge, you might still get a sentence of life, but you would be eligible for parole. So that is the big distinction between the first and second degree from a charging perspective and a sentencing standpoint. So the initial theories was that look, the defense was trying to get the first degree off the table. They were showing some acceptance of culpability on Brian Walshe's part and expecting the prosecution to recognize that maybe the premeditation wasn't their strongest, aspect of their case, and they would come to the table and negotiate. And we even saw that with the defense alluding at some point to the judge that the Commonwealth was not being reasonable in their plea negotiations and discussions. But I think there was a second strategy here with the defense having Brian Walshe plead guilty to those 2 lesser charges as well. It was clear that at least as of opening statements, the defense planned on calling Brian Walshe as a witness. They sort of promised the jury that they would be hearing from Brian Walshe and what his actions were on the early morning hours of January 1 through the afternoon when we start to see surveillance footage of him at the Lowe's buying all these cleaning supplies and mops and random supply things. And we never heard from him. So by pleading guilty to those lesser charges, Brian Walshe's team, I think, was trying to limit some of the prosecution's evidence that was coming in because, the dismemberment of your spouse after she dies, whether it's unexpected or not, I think that starts to really challenge the reasonableness of a person's conduct. I don't think that the typical juror is going to think that my spouse suddenly died totally unexpectedly. Now I'm going to dismember her and throw her in dumpsters, right? Yeah. So I think the defense was hoping, well, maybe we can get that. If we plead guilty to those things, it's going to be such prejudicial evidence that the judge won't let it in. But we don't know. I mean, we really don't know what the defense, what their true strategy was. But those seem to be the 2 logical thought process that the defense may have had at the time.
Okay, so you just alluded to what the jury is having to consider with the way the defense presented its case, found the body, panicked, disposed of it. What do you think, Jennifer, of the evidence the prosecution put forth with the hardware that was bought, the surveillance video, the DNA evidence it collected? Strong case?
For sure.
Yeah.
The surveillance footage and the still photos of Brian Walshe purchasing all of those items, which really point to a cleanup effort. That's supported also by the medical examiner who testified, who said that something as simple as water could erase a blood sample so that it wouldn't be able to be tested. And we know that Brian Walshe bought multiple bottles of bleach. He bought 5 bottles of hydrogen peroxide, 50 pounds of baking soda. Along with the fact that he was Googling how to dispose of a body, how long before a body starts to smell. Really disturbing and macabre Google searches to be doing if you're claiming that your wife sort of unexpectedly died in the bed on New Year's Day. Yeah. So I think that the prosecution did a really good job of telling the jury who Anna Walshe was as a person, because that often gets lost in criminal cases. The victims kind of get lost. I think they did a good job of humanizing her. And I think they also did a good job of setting forth, the physical evidence that they had and tying it to Brian Walshe. And it's very compelling. A picture tells 1,000 words.
It is compelling physical evidence. And just want to talk about when the forensic scientists testified that Anna Walshe's DNA was found on a pair of bloody slippers, a hatchet, a Tyvek suit, a stained rug, other items from the trash. And you made an interesting point. We're all used to seeing crime shows where DNA can be extracted from the tiniest bit of blood, and that is just not really the way it works.
It is not. We all see these shows where they solve a complex murder mystery in under an hour. Right. That's not how real life works. We cannot get fingerprints off of every surface. We cannot test for DNA off of the most minuscule sampling. There's lots of things that can compromise a DNA sample. And that was also part of the defense's claims. They were saying, on cross-examination to the scientists who collected and tested this DNA to confirm that it was Anna Walshe's DNA and all of these different things, that they don't know how the DNA actually got there. So the defense was saying, suggesting that the DNA, the blood, could have been transferred from one item to the next when all of these items were put together into one trash bag and then thrown into one dumpster.
Sure. Jennifer, you called this today, the defense not calling any witnesses, one of 3 big surprises in this trial. Certainly, it surprised us as onlookers. How, if at all, does this influence the jury, this suddenness?
So the jury is going to receive an instruction, as we talked about before, that it's not the defense's job to prove this case.
Right.
It's the Commonwealth's obligation. They carry the burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So the jury will be getting that instruction, again, from the judge tomorrow before closing arguments. With that said, I think the jury was expecting, based upon opening statements from the defense, to hear from Brian Walshe himself. And I think that this is leaving a hole for the jury. And I think, although, they know that he's not obligated to put on a defense, I think they were expecting to hear from him. And this is probably making the jury go, huh, right? We thought we were going to hear from Brian Walshe. We thought we were going to hear from additional medical testimony about sudden unexpected death syndrome, perhaps about Anna Walsh's her health, and we're not. And so I think that that's something that's going to give the jury pause.
Yeah, just a few more minutes here, Jennifer, and then we'll let you go. But what is your expectation? So closing arguments tomorrow. The judge said she had already started to put together jury instructions, which was very interesting. She clearly expected the defense to wrap it up pretty quickly today. Walk us through what happens next, and you don't need to make a prediction about what you see happening, but what's your gut here on how this will conclude as of tomorrow?
So tomorrow the jury is going to get extensive jury instructions about the different elements of the first-degree murder charge that the prosecution needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And they are going to be given further instructions about consciousness of guilt and what type of evidence can be deemed to be consciousness of guilt evidence. They are going to be reminded again of that it's the Commonwealth's burden and that a defendant has a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, but they cannot draw any inferences from the fact that the defendant did not testify in his own defense. And so they are going to be getting some pretty clear and concise instructions on the elements of the case that they need to then consider as they reflect on the testimony, take a look at their notes, and review a lot of that evidence. And I think the timeline in this case of how things unfolded is going to be really important for the jury to make sure that they're clear on and that they really understand it, because there really is a small window of time on New Year's Day when Anna Walshe could have been killed. And so the jury, I think, really needs to sort of focus in on that, focus in on the surveillance videos and on the testimony, weigh the testimony from the medical examiner. About 5 to 10% of the population of everybody, that includes children, adults, and seniors, can just die of a sudden unexpected death without any explanation or any indication that anything was wrong in advance. They really need to sit with that and make a decision. Was it reasonable that Anna Walshe died from this sudden unexpected death?
Yeah.
And that's going to be their burden. It's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, we always appreciate your insight, distilling these mounds of information into what makes sense for the viewer. And